The dusty, dimly lit market buzzed with the kind of energy that made anyone with a conscience uneasy. James had been in plenty of shady places, but the black market on Goria Station had a unique way of turning your stomach. The air was thick with desperation and greed, and everything was for sale, no questions asked. He wasn't here by choice, but when you're a mercenary running low on credits and high on problems, you take work wherever you can find it. He just finished a routine smuggling job when his client proposed a twist. "Payment's going to be a little unconventional," the man said, leaning in like he was offering James the deal of a lifetime. James, skeptical as always, folded his arms. "I prefer credits. You know, currency that actually works." The man smirked and motioned toward a dark corner of the hangar. "Oh, trust me, this will be worth more than credits." And that's when James saw her. At first glance, she looked fragile, wrapped in a thin silvery fabric that shimmered faintly under the dim lights. Her skin glowed faintly violet, her hair cascading in silver waves that framed sharp, ethereal features. But it was her eyes that stopped James in his tracks, bright, silver gray, and piercing, like she could see straight into his soul. She stood tall despite the chains on her wrists, her gaze defiant even in the face of her supposed captivity. "What the hell is this?" James snapped, his tone colder than he intended. "A slave," the client replied casually, like he was offering James a bottle of water. "She's worth a fortune. Royal stock, though she won't say where from. You'll make triple your credits selling her to the right buyer." James felt his stomach churn. He wasn't a saint, but slavery? That was a hard line. "I don't deal in people," he said firmly, already turning away. "Wait," the woman's voice was sharp, cutting through the noise like a blade. It was the first time she had spoken, and her accent was unlike anything James had heard, musical, commanding, and utterly unafraid. "I can pay you more than he ever could. Free me, and I'll give you everything." The client sneered, pulling a weapon halfway from its holster. "Don't listen to her. She's lying." James's hand hovered near his blaster, his instincts screaming at him to walk away. But those eyes, they didn't look like they belonged to a liar. Against his better judgment, he turned back to her. "What's your name?" "Kara," she replied, holding his gaze. "And if you help me, I promise you'll never regret it." The client scoffed. "She's nothing but trouble." Trouble was something James understood, and if Kara was trouble, she was the kind that could reshape a man's entire life. He didn't know why he believed her. Maybe it was the way she stood, unbowed despite her situation, or the quiet desperation hidden beneath her defiance. Whatever the reason, James made his choice in an instant. "Deal," he said, his voice steady. The client's face twisted in fury, but James's blaster was faster than his temper. With one shot, the chain fell from Kara's wrist, and she stepped forward, free for the first time in what seemed like a long while. James expected her to stumble or run. Instead, she stood tall, a faint smile gracing her lips. "You won't regret this," she said again, this time with an air of certainty that unsettled James more than anything else. They didn't have time to celebrate. Alarms echoed through the hangar as the client's associates came running. Kara grabbed James's arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "We need to go. Now." As they sprinted toward his ship, James couldn't shake the feeling that he had just signed up for something far bigger than he could handle. By the time they launched into hyperspace, leaving the chaos of Goria Station behind, he was already questioning every decision he'd made in the last hour. "What's your story?" James asked once they were safely away, leaning against the cockpit wall and catching his breath. Kara hesitated for the first time, her confident facade cracking just slightly. "It's complicated." "Try me," James said, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. She looked out the viewport, her silver eyes reflecting the stars. "I wasn't always a slave. I am, a princess." James blinked. "A princess?" She nodded. "From Etheria. My people are powerful, but also traditional. I left because I wanted something more. But leaving wasn't exactly legal." "So, what?" James asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "You're some kind of runaway royal?" Kara turned to face him, her expression a mix of vulnerability and determination. "Something like that. And if my people find me, they won't just take me back. They'll destroy anyone who's helped me, including you." James let out a low whistle. "Great. So not only am I harboring a fugitive, but a fugitive who's worth more trouble than I've ever seen. Kara smirked. I warned you. The ship's sensors beeped, cutting their conversation short. James checked the readings and cursed under his breath. We've got company. 3 ships had just dropped out of hyperspace, their weapons hot and their intentions clear. Kara's expression hardened, her regal demeanor returning like a mask she hadn't worn in years. Those are Etherian ships, the Royal Guard. James's hand tightened on the controls. Let me guess. They're not here to negotiate. Not exactly. Kara leaned closer, her voice low but firm. You trusted me once, and it changed both our lives. Trust me again. I'll show you why. And just like that, James found himself hurtling into a fight he hadn't signed up for, bound to an alien princess whose secrets were as dangerous as they were irresistible. The ship shuddered as James yanked the controls hard to the left, narrowly dodging a volley of plasma bolts. The Etherian ships were faster than anything he'd ever flown against, and their pilots were relentless. His hands gripped the controls so tightly that his knuckles turned white and sweat beaded on his forehead. This wasn't just any pursuit. These people weren't here to make arrests. They wanted Kara, and they were ready to burn his ship into atoms to get her. Are you just going to sit there, or are you going to help? James barked, his voice strained with effort as he wrestled the ship into another evasive maneuver. Kara was already on her feet, moving with a calmness that didn't match the chaos outside. I'm looking for the weapons console, she said, her tone frustratingly level. Left panel, second seat, James replied, jerking his head toward the back of the cockpit. And hurry up. We've got about 30 seconds before they box us in. She slid into the seat, her fingers dancing over the controls like she'd done this 1,000 times before. The weapons system hummed to life, and a faint smirk tugged at her lips. Let's see how good they really are. The first volley she fired wasn't meant to hit. It was a warning shot, a calculated burst that scattered the Etherian ships just enough to give them breathing room. James glanced over, a flicker of admiration breaking through his frustration. Not bad. Just keep us flying, Kara said, her voice steady despite the storm raging outside. I'll take care of the rest. James wasn't sure whether to feel reassured or terrified. He wasn't used to passengers who knew their way around a weapons console, let alone ones who seemed so comfortable under fire. But Kara wasn't just anyone, and he was beginning to realize that her story was a lot more complicated than she'd let on. As she fired another round, taking out the shields on one of the pursuing ships, James couldn't help but ask, So, are you going to tell me why your own people are so desperate to drag you back? Kara didn't look up from the console. It's not just about me leaving, it's about what I took with me. James groaned. Of course there's more. Let me guess, some priceless artifact. Top secret weapon plans. Something like that, Kara said, her tone evasive. James swore under his breath. You know, this would have been good information to share before I decided to risk my neck for you. You didn't ask, she said, and for the first time, there was a hint of humor in her voice. Before James could reply, the ship rocked violently, the shields flaring as another barrage of plasma hit them. Alarms blared, and he slammed the controls, cursing. Shields are down to 30%. If you've got a plan, now's the time. Kara's fingers flew across the console, and for a moment, James thought she was ignoring him. But then the ship's rear cannon fired, a precise, concentrated blast that hit one of the Etherian ships dead on. It spiraled out of control before exploding in a blinding flash. Two left, she said, her voice calm but edged with determination. Remind me never to play cards with you, James muttered, throwing the ship into a roll to dodge another volley. You've got a hell of a poker face. The remaining ships regrouped, their movements more coordinated now. James could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken knowledge that they were running out of options. The Etherians were too fast, too skilled, and too determined. If they didn't do something drastic, it was only a matter of time before they were caught. Kara seemed to sense it too. Do you trust me? She asked suddenly, her voice cutting through the noise. James shot her a sharp look. You really think this is the time to ask that? I need to know, she pressed, her silver eyes locking onto his. Do you trust me? James hesitated. Every instinct screamed at him to say no, to keep his guard up and protect himself. But something about the way she looked at him, steadfast, unyielding, almost vulnerable, made him pause. Against his better judgment, he nodded. Yeah, I trust you for now. Good, she said, a faint smile tugging at her lips. Then follow my lead. Before he could ask what she meant, she was on her feet, moving toward the back of the ship. James didn't have time to stop her, not with the Etherians closing in, but his curiosity burned as brightly as his frustration. What could she possibly do that would make a difference now? A moment later, the ship's systems lit up with a new energy signature. James glanced at the readout, his heart skipping a beat. What the hell is that? An old Etherian trick, Kara called back, her voice echoing faintly over the comms. It's a cloaking device. Temporary, but it'll buy us time. James didn't ask how she'd managed to activate a cloaking device on his ship, or why she hadn't mentioned it before. He was too busy engaging the system and watching as the Etherian ships suddenly hesitated, their sensors unable to lock onto them. The ship slipped into the shadows of a nearby asteroid field, the Etherians searching in vain. For the first time since the chase had started, James allowed himself a shallow breath of relief. Kara returned to the cockpit, her expression unreadable. They won't give up. Not until they have what they want. James leaned back in his seat, running a hand through his hair. And what exactly do they want? What did you take, Kara? She hesitated, and for the first time, James saw a flicker of doubt in her eyes. It's not a what, she said quietly. It's a who. James blinked, the words taking a moment to sink in. You took someone. She nodded, her gaze dropping to the floor. My sister. She was next in line for the throne. But the council, they were going to use her. Force her into a union she didn't want, to strengthen their power. I couldn't let that happen. James stared at her, his mind racing. This wasn't just about a runaway princess anymore. This was a full-blown political scandal, the kind of thing that could ignite a war. Where is she now? He asked, his voice low. She's safe, Kara said, her tone firm. Hidden far from here. But the council doesn't know that. They think I have her, and they'll stop at nothing to find her. James let out a slow breath, the weight of her words settling over him like a storm cloud. He was in way over his head, tangled in a web of lies, power, and danger that he didn't fully understand. And yet, as he looked at Kara, standing there with a quiet strength that belied her situation, he knew there was no turning back. You've got guts, I'll give you that, he said finally. But if we're going to survive this, I need to know everything. No more half-truths, no more secrets. Deal? Kara met his gaze, her expression softening just slightly. Deal. The ship drifted silently through the asteroid field, the Etherian ships still searching in the distance. For now, they were safe. But James knew it was only a matter of time before the hunt resumed. Whatever came next, one thing was certain, his life would never be the same. And, deep down, he wasn't sure he wanted it to be. As the ship drifted deeper into the asteroid field, the hum of the cloaking device blended with the distant crackle of debris brushing against the hull. James kept his hands on the controls, scanning the flickering radar for any sign of the Etherians. For now, the silence was a temporary reprieve, but it did little to ease the unease building in his chest. Kara stood by the viewport, her silver eyes fixed on the asteroid belt, as though searching for answers in the endless expanse. Her earlier calm had given way to something more guarded, more calculating. James watched her out of the corner of his eye, trying to piece together the puzzle she'd become. So, he began cautiously, breaking the silence. You saved your sister, took her away from the Etherians, and now they're hunting you. That about sum it up? Kara didn't turn to face him, but her voice was steady. That's the simple version, but nothing about this is simple. James raised an eyebrow. Enlighten me. She let out a slow breath, her fingers trailing along the edge of the console. My sister Leora wasn't just the next in line for the throne. She's a symbol. Our people, they look at her and see hope. Unity. The council sees her as leverage. A way to solidify their control. I wasn't just protecting her. I was protecting what she stands for. James frowned, leaning back in his seat. And you? What do you stand for in all this? Kara finally turned to look at him, her gaze piercing. I stand for freedom, for choice, for a future where my people aren't pawns in some political game. He nodded slowly, her words sinking in. There was conviction in her voice, a fire that couldn't be faked. But there was also something else, something she wasn't saying. James decided not to press her, at least not yet. He had a feeling the truth would come out eventually, whether she wanted it to or not. As they navigated through the asteroid field, James's comms panel flickered to life. A garbled transmission crackled through the speakers, barely audible over the ship's hum. He frowned, adjusting the frequency until the signal cleared slightly. Unregistered vessel, respond immediately. James's heart sank. It wasn't the Etherians, it was worse. The voice belonged to a patrol from the Galactic Authority, the interstellar force that governed this sector. They had a reputation for being thorough, and for bending the rules when it suited them. Great, James muttered under his breath. Just what we needed. Kara moved closer, her expression tense. Can they see us? Not yet, he said, his fingers dancing over the controls. But if they pick up the cloaking device's signature, we're in trouble. These guys don't take kindly to unregistered tech. Can we outrun them? She asked. Not without blowing our cover. And if we do that, the Etherians will find us in minutes. He glanced at her, his jaw tightening. Got any bright ideas? Kara hesitated, then nodded. Let me talk to them. James stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Talk to them? Are you serious? They're not exactly known for their diplomacy. They'll listen to me, she said, her voice firm. Trust me. He hesitated, then reluctantly nodded. Fine. But if this goes sideways, we're running. No arguments. Kara took the comms headset and adjusted the frequency, her posture straightening as if preparing for battle. When she spoke, her voice was calm, authoritative. This is Captain Lever Arden of the civilian transport ship Star Shadow. We are experiencing technical difficulties and request clearance to pass through this sector. James blinked, caught off guard by how easily the lie rolled off her tongue. He glanced at her, impressed despite himself. There was a long pause on the other end, followed by a curt response. Star Shadow, your identification code is not in our database. Prepare to be boarded. Kara didn't flinch. Understood. We're transmitting emergency authorization now. She tapped a sequence into the console, and James's jaw dropped as the system displayed a forged identification code. Where the hell did you get that? He whispered. Later, she muttered, focusing on the comms. The patrol ship's captain responded, his tone grudgingly respectful. Authorization received. Proceed with caution, Star Shadow. And next time, ensure your codes are up to date. The transmission ended, and James let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. I can't believe that worked. Kara handed the headset back to him, her expression unreadable. They won't bother us again, not for now. James shook his head, equal parts impressed and frustrated. You've got more secrets than a black market auction. Kara offered a faint smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. Sometimes secrets are all that keep you alive. The tension between them lingered as they continued through the asteroid field. James couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something crucial, some piece of the puzzle that would make everything click. But before he could dwell on it, the radar beeped, drawing his attention back to the controls. Two ships appeared on the edge of the screen, their signatures unmistakably Etherian. They'd found them. Brace yourself, James said, gripping the controls. Here we go again. Kara moved to the weapons console, her expression hardening. I'll cover you. As the Etherian ships closed in, the Star Shadow veered through the asteroid field, weaving between massive rocks and narrow crevices. Plasma bolts lit up the darkness, each shot bringing them closer to destruction, but Kara's aim was precise, had every shot calculated to keep the enemy at bay. James pushed the ship to its limits, the engines straining as he dodged and swerved. He couldn't help but marvel at Kara's composure, the way she seemed almost at home in the chaos. Whoever she was, whatever her past, she was no ordinary runaway. As the battle raged on, James's mind raced. This wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about uncovering the truth about Kara, her sister, and the forces that hunted them. And as much as he hated to admit it, he was starting to believe in her cause. For better or worse, he was in this now. And there was no turning back.